All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. Dan, one of your hosts here alongside our good friend Sam, CFC Central. And look, it was a little after, into the wee hours after deadline day, a term sheet had to be submitted. It was required, but Jadon Sancho officially announced in front of the Stamford Bridge faithful after completing a move from Manchester United just after deadline day to Chelsea, getting back to London, getting back to the team that he supported and rooted for as a younger individual, and now has an opportunity to play potentially a major role in Chelsea's attack in the coming season under Enzo Maresca. But we are going to be doing one of our patented deep dive episodes. That's right. We'll be taking you through a little bit of Jaden Sancho's footballing journey. We'll get you into understanding how he went from being one of the most brilliant Golden Boy stars in the Bundesliga to being a bit of a forgotten man and unused player at Manchester United before making the switch after a bright half-season loan to Borussia Dortmund to help them get to a Champions League final last season, ultimately making his way to Chelsea. We'll talk about his strengths. We'll talk about his weaknesses, why he's going to potentially be maybe a floor raiser or a ceiling raiser. That's a question we want to answer through this episode and figure out where Maresca is going to likely deploy him, what he brings to that attack of about 15 wingers that we have on payroll right now. But Sam, is this a jigsaw puzzle piece that you saw coming in on deadline day? And maybe what's your initial reaction to Jaden Sancho coming to Chelsea before we get into all the specifics?
Yeah, perplexed, to be honest. We were discussing what's the plan with all the wingers and one center forward and, an 18-year-old kid trying to find his way in professional football. But yeah, still trying to put the jigsaw together, to be honest. But a part of the nostalgic part of me is sort of hopeful. I've seen Sancho play, all of us have seen Sancho play and exhilarate for Dortmund in the Bundesliga. So there's hope that there's still that player there somewhere and maybe, hasn't been utilized, maybe hasn't been made to feel the way that he should be feeling. And hopefully, when he comes back to the club that he supported as a young boy, and also with maybe the support structure that knows him very well in terms of Joe Shields, finding him and sort of giving him the love that he needed. Maybe there's a possibility we see the best of him. And the good part is, obviously, we are getting him at almost a fourth of the cost that United bought him for. And he's also willing to take a massive wage cut to sort of prove that he can make it. And all the factors that we've mentioned here in terms of being desperate to make it are part of his story. Not many people in football turn their back on Pep Guardiola. And Pep basically told him at 17 that, you first have to prove to me that you're ready to survive tackles from uh, Vincent Company and Kyle Walker, and then basically I'll ease you in. And Sancho said, no, I want to play now. And you have Raheem Sterling and all these guys in front of me, and I'm not getting any football. And he's done this consistently in his career where he's moved or taken on challenges. One of his youth coaches said that he always used to stand near the best defender of the side because he wanted to beat him 1v1. So that's the mentality there. And hopefully that translates, it's still alive in him. It just needs the right kind of fuel. So I've got my fingers crossed. I'm actually quite secretly excited for this. So yeah, hoping that it all comes true and all comes together.
Well, the top bit of admin that we always like to get out of the way is just thanking everyone who supports the podcast and the amazing community of viewers and listeners that we have. So if you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, always appreciate it. If you get a chance to subscribe on YouTube and hit the bell icon to get notified, only about 45% of people who watch the videos are subscribed. So look, if you're one of the 55%, good opportunity to subscribe right now. Get involved, leave a like or even comment. Say thanks to Sam for all the diligent research he's going to absolutely amaze you with in this episode. And then you also can sign up for our free weekly newsletter, the London is Blue Dispatch, written by Sam. And you can join our free or paid versions of our Discord community as well. But look, as we get into it, we always like to, in these episodes, tell a little bit of the human story behind the player, because ultimately, they're look, there's someone you can control in FIFA, but they are a living, breathing human being first, and they might have some history or background that you may not be aware of. How did they get to Stamford Bridge? That's going to be what we look at first. And so, Sam, walk us through in your research the profile of Jadon Sancho from, I'm going to guess, not necessarily birth, but let's just say from early ages into the point where he is now, where he is going to be a hopefully contributing factor to Chelsea's success this season.
Yeah, quite an interesting story. Obviously, we know the phenom that came to be at a tender teenage, time in his life. But he actually grew up on an estate in the lower middle class neighborhood of Kennington. And he used to play small-sided games on the streets and particularly in cages. So cage football is basically where, his bread and butter happened in terms of his football education. He was spotted by Watford at the age of 7 in a small football camp that was held actually very close to Stamford Bridge. And after watching him for 2 years, they signed him. He actually rejected Arsenal purely because of family and sort of transportation issues and said, it would be easier to do Watford. So he then basically joined Watford's academy. He's a boyhood Chelsea fan, says that he idolized Frank Lampard, loved watching Didier Drogba as well. And when he got into Watford, he lived in, Kennington. So he often had to travel 2 hours one way for a 2 hour practice session and then travel back. And he did this for 4 years before Watford basically put him in a high-end boarding school to sort of like help supplement his, education while he was growing up. At the age of 14, City basically reached out to him, and under the EPPP, or the Elite Player Performance Program, he was basically recruited into that team and he ripped through the ranks. By the age of 17, he was primed by the City hierarchy for first team football, and that's where, clash of opinions occurred. Pep wanted to integrate him like Phil Foden, slow and steady, and Sancho on the other side, he saw all of his young teammates, Christian Pulisic, all of these young guys, Gio Reyna making a name in Dortmund, and he said, maybe there's a market for me there, and he got his move. And very, very quickly, he basically went from becoming the first Englishman to play for Borussia Dortmund to 37 goals and 41 assists in just 92 league games. That is absolutely astonishing, to be honest, even in the Bundesliga. And spent some good times there before Man United basically moved to buy him for 73 million USD. And they tried doing this a year before, but Mark Zorc, who was the sporting director, talked to Sancho and said, look, it's probably not your time, so wait a year. So he jumped the year after. Unfortunately, at United, the move didn't go very well for him, endured a very, very torrid time, fell out publicly with the manager, Ten Hag. In the first season, obviously, Ronaldo was on the books, and I think a little bit of that hindered where he was played, when he was played. So there was a lot of frustration there. Maybe did not feel the love and appreciation that he wanted to feel. And yeah, after all of that fallout happened, he was loaned to Dortmund last season. Again, I would say maybe like a up and down spell where he managed 2 goals, 2 assists in 11 starts, made the Champions League final, but ultimately Dortmund did not exercise their option to buy him. And with United looking to move him on, he basically moved very quickly to sign him on our books. So that's where we stand. Like you mentioned, a forgotten man, a prodigy, and by a lot of people mentioned as a generational talent. But yeah, he's still 24 years old, so it's not like everything has slipped him by. And maybe there's belief in our hierarchy that we can still revive, the special boy that's inside of him, and still a talent. But can you eke it out consistently?
Yeah, and there was also that interesting, and I guess I would say very unfortunate from the player perspective situation. If you remember when Manchester United reported about the fact where Aaron Ten Hag shared about Jaden Sancho's like mental health struggles in the prior season, he talked about the physical and mental factors that the player had in the December time period, and then didn't actually come back into the side and in a very minimal and limited role until February. And just seemingly could be something where just a change of environment, change of pace is absolutely what would benefit the player in this regard, both from a organizational perspective and also from a managerial perspective too, because those are things from a trust element. If you're having things maybe shared out about you that usually we get information about player fitness or maybe just being unavailable, but to kind of lead into the conversation with a physical and mental, it definitely came across as, at least in my perspective, a very insensitive remark from Ten Hag, and probably did not put either of them on the path to being able to kind of come up with a productive working relationship moving forward.
I mean, you know my opinions on Ten Hag. I think he's a few sandwiches short of a picnic, but genuinely, like, I couldn't have chosen a better person to sabotage United from the inside. So, not complaining at all. And yeah, I think it was extremely poorly handled by him. Of the many reasons Manchester United will tell you, of how badly he's handled them. But again, like we all know that I mean, especially with precocious talents, you need to be very careful in terms of how you manage them, the game time you give them, and how they're treated. And if you fall out of favor, then suddenly everything drops. Your mental health does, and obviously your on-pitch indicators are also dropping. So we did see, I would say, significantly different Jadon Sancho, not just in terms of his application, but also the output obviously suffered because of it. So like you said, maybe a change of pace. Obviously, a Stamford Bridge, that means a couple of notches up because it is an unforgiving crowd. But obviously, the Chelsea connection helps. The fact that he's also a very exciting player to watch on his day. So maybe, that's a crowd lifter would be a great way to describe him. So if he clicks, if he gets his mojo back on, then undoubtedly we have a special player on our hands. And we do love a good wing wizard here. So I'm hoping that comes to pass.
That would be ideal. We're going to take our first ad break. When we get back, we're going to get into all about the strengths and weaknesses in Jaden Sancho's game. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. Okay, Sam. So as we get into it off the top, I'd like to break down some of the strengths that Jaden Sancho has. What are the things that we as supporters should be excited for? And then also get into some of the opportunities or areas where you think maybe his game isn't as well rounded as it should be. And so maybe just even framing like, which types of matches did you watch to understand or kind of set the stage for the profile? Because obviously there's matches at United, there's matches at Dortmund in the early part of his career, there's the return to Dortmund and the loan. Like, help us understand from what phases of his footballing journey you picked from, and then let's get into some of those strengths.
Yeah, super good question, to be honest. So I tried to figure out, basically chart a story in terms of what went wrong from where he began. So I started with probably his brightest games for Dortmund early on in his tenure. And it was a little bit of a oversight on my part because I was like, wow, one goal and two assists, gotta watch this game. And then I realized it was Erling Haaland's debut, and he came on and he scored a hat trick. So he got two assists from Jadon Sancho. So I was like, okay, that's not the hardest thing in the world, but he did have a good game, fortunately for me. So I was able to see in terms of how well he performed, and from there, I jumped again 2 games to the Manchester United tenure, and then after that, another 2 games for the Dortmund loan. So like in totality, I did 7 games over the past 3 games to figure out. Sorry, in the past 3 days, in terms of trying to figure out where he was, why wasn't it working? Was it just playing factors, the team not being correctly constructed for him? So yeah, I think that's where I come from. I'm always trying to figure out, whether the flank is right, whether the opponents have changed, has his body changed in terms of from where he was as a 17-year-old to where he is now as a 24-year-old. And the answer is yes. Some parts of him have changed in terms of how his body composition is. He's maybe not as agile as he used to be, maybe bulked up a little bit for the Premier League as well. So that also plays a part. But that's where I'm coming from, Dan, trying to figure out, where those minor differences could be.
And so again, some of those strengths that we kind of get into, I mean, I think there's, areas of just his footballing. I mean, the way that he's been brought up within football, obviously he's had, I think, some good pedigree in terms of individuals he's been able to learn under and then systems he's been involved in. And I think also maybe just like game awareness would be kind of maybe two good things to start off with.
Yeah, so we did talk a little bit about his, psychological mindset, which I think is a big plus. I think he's very driven, very ambitious. His coaches describe him like that. Somebody who's extremely keen to learn, somebody who's always trying to make himself better over time. So I don't think like most footballers are like that. But again, he's been described as somebody who doesn't like noise off the pitch. He goes home, plays Fortnite or FIFA, and then spends time with his family. So psychologically, I think there's a low drama, low maintenance kind of player, which is always great, very focused. But I think where he excels is his technical skill set, which is exceedingly well developed. So I think like when I look at him, it's super evident that his years of playing in 5v5 KH matches make him super accomplished in terms of this foundation. He's supremely good in tight situations. He's two-footed and also two-way winger, so he can play both flanks. He can also play in central areas, but more importantly, he can explode either way. He's equally comfortable going to the byline and crossing, or just coming inside and taking on his man and driving towards the defense. So he's very unpredictable, has a nice box of tricks, and again, even when you look at his physical slash technical characteristics, his close control, the way he's able to manipulate the ball in tight spaces under pressure, his balance, absolutely exquisite. And I said this to a friend. I think he's a street footballer on a football pitch. He genuinely is. And in those spaces, like you put him against the touchline versus like one player or two players, he'll find a way out. He'll nutmeg you, he'll flick it over your head, and he'll sprint and he'll get onto the ball. So find solutions when the need is, absolutely optimal, when there's a lot of pressure on. So his technical fundamentals, his foundations there are supremely strong. So I think there he's supremely well rounded. Another thing that struck me as a standout strength is his passing, his vision. He shows excellent vision, and his technique in terms of not just anticipating and recognizing high value passes, but being able to execute them with either foot is quite incredible. He has a tendency to sort of float into pockets, like small spaces in front of the last line he receives. He drives at the defensive line, and then he's got this lovely ability to manipulate angles. So he'll wait for somebody to step out, and then suddenly he'll shift the ball, and with either his left or right foot, he'll sort of punch a shot through ball through that angle for one of the runners in behind. So he's very, very good in terms of drawing people out, in terms of creating angles for some dangerous passes, especially at short range. Very devastating. And unfortunately, at United, where he was used mostly in a wide role, and a lot of the onus on creating went to Bruno Fernandes, I don't think we saw the best of him in those respects. But if you give him the opportunity to sort of maybe have 50, 60 touches and basically collect in those areas, then you're definitely going to see the best of him. He's like the timing of his passes, the release, like when he releases it, the weight of it, his reading of angles, his reading of positioning of players, absolutely astute. There was this one instance where I was watching the Augsburg game, and he received the ball on the left wing, and Haaland was making a run basically towards the box, and the ball came onto his right foot. He basically shaped to dribble, so the fullback thought he was going to dribble down the line, and then with the outside of his boot, he placed, curving through ball right in Erling Haaland's path. So he does this very often, where he's able to assess the weight of the pass needed and again, like find runners into the box. So he will give you a lot of good chances, good avenues to get into the box. So yeah, I think those two definitely stood out for me when watching him.
And I think there's maybe just a conception around like which side of the pitch should he be playing on. And obviously, I think we have a couple of players right now who can play on the left or on the right, particularly like adding Neto into the side. So maybe just even the ability or the availability to play in multiple positions across the attack, I think is something that may be a strength that we want to kind of talk about too. And then just how he is able to kind of like leverage space in the way that he engages in the different phases of the game. I mean, I think those are maybe other, like, if we're kind of going to give the like top four, those feel like two other things that we could dive into as well.
Yeah, I think that's again a really, really nice question and perspective to look into. So, like I mentioned, he's a two-way winger, so he's actually super comfortable on both flanks. And maybe there's a misconception that he likes playing the left wing, but most of his output actually came on the right-hand side, where he again proved to be super destructive. And I think he also varies his play in terms of how he moves, where he goes, with zone he tries to attack based on where he's playing. So if you see him on, maybe the right hand side, then he's actively trying to hit the byline. And if he does get an opportunity to isolate against the fullback, like one versus one, he's not going to try and beat you for pace. He's slowly going to push you into the box where mistakes become super valuable. And then he'll wait for runners to arrive in the box and then use his passing to basically needle a pass through maybe two defenders to find somebody arriving to hit the ball into the back of the net. So that's his strength. He's not a 1v1 winger who's reliant on pace or acceleration. He's more about maybe like a Grealish, who'll carry it very slowly into dangerous areas and then look for the option. So I think that's what he does on the right hand side. If on the left, again, not super reliant on beating the man, he'll try to use one twos. So maybe with the fullback or a wide midfielder pushing up, he'll try to get a 1-2 into space, or he uses underlaps as sort of diversions. He'll wait for the fullback to commit, and then he'll drive diagonally towards the center from where, like I mentioned, he's very good at picking out passes or just taking basically shots at goal. So that's where, you have to decide where do you see his ideal fit, on the left or the right. But in essence, he can do both. I will also say that, in my opinion, he's not a winger. I don't think he's a winger. He's more of like a wide playmaker, in my opinion, almost like a Palmer is. Like, you think a Palmer is going to be a winger, but his best work comes when he drifts inside from the wide zone, and he's basically got space to attack in those half spaces. That's where Sancho is the best at. It's on both sides. So that's how you should use him or look to profile him. And the last strength I would say is that he's again super associative, somebody who loves areas of the pitch where he's able to combine the four or five players. I think that's what he really, really thrives in. He's able to sort of make these little interchanges, always looking for sneaky passes into the space. And he's got a very good radar for who's making runs where. He's got his head up, so he knows who's moving in which direction, and he will try the dangerous pass. He will try, a very good pass into those spaces to try and exploit maybe like defensive positioning. So again, somebody who will thrive in little pockets where you give him the right players, especially if on the left hand side you have somebody like a Joao Felix or an Nkunku who's able to also offer you those playing in tight spaces, little dribbles, and driving into space. It's a very exciting thing to think about on the ball. We'll talk more about off the ball or out of possession later on, but yeah, super associative, and will be great to see like those little touches you need in tight spaces, especially like the tight block we came up against yesterday, against Palace's 5-4-1, for example. Then there's always this hesitancy of trying to play between lines because there are five defenders. So if you want to be daring and if you want to sort of ease them out and exploit that space, then somebody like him definitely helps.
So as we maybe think about, and that's a lot of praise to set the stage for why we should be excited, what we should be looking forward to as he gets up to speed, as he gets minutes after the international break here. Um, what about areas where he doesn't necessarily excel? And I'm thinking about maybe just in the sprinting versus distance in terms of how he engages, how kind of quick his movement is up and down the pitch. And then if we're talking about just the desire to take on and to kind of play in a more aggressive manner. I mean, I think those are two things where we're not going to see or maybe see the best of Jaden Sancho in those moments on the pitch.
Agreed. I think he's more of a, somebody who maybe profiles quite closely to Nkunku in that respect, where he's got great agility because he's always trying to drop his shoulder. He's always trying to throw you off balance before he explodes one or the other way. But that's what he relies on. He's not going to try and beat you, for pace or try to use that acceleration. He has maybe like quickness over the first 2, 3 yards, but that's about it. If you try to make him go in a foot race, over 15, 20 yards, he's 100% going to lose. He's not got that burst. I don't think he's got the athleticism for it. But in those short maneuvers, he can definitely give you an issue. And it's also again like I like how he adapts because you rarely see him, you know, maybe running shoulder to shoulder with the person for like 15, 20 yards or 35 yards. He's just pull out. He knows he's not going to win it. So he's smart about conserving energy. He's again always trying to use those 1-2s. That's why he, I think, adapts to that as well, because instead of attacking space with the ball, he passes it somewhere else and he tries to attack without it. And again, like super selfless in that manner. But again, I think it's also negating and nullifying a physical weakness there in terms of his speed and agility. I think also he's become a little slower since his first stint at Dortmund, like I
Hmm.
mentioned, maybe a little bulkier. Um, Again, you have to be physically resistant to contact as a forward in the Premier League. So he's still again in a physical manner, maybe not quite there. He's not the best at sort of like enduring contact, but he's definitely stronger than he was. But that's come at maybe the cost of a little bit of his sprinting speed and a little bit of his acceleration. So that I would earmark as 100% a weakness. The biggest one, in my opinion, is the fact that he's extremely dual and contact averse. Like the
Hmm.
guy does not like to get stuck in. He just does not like to put out any kind of defensive output. So in terms of quality, in terms of quantity, just bad. Even from an eye test perspective, he regularly pulls out of 50-50s. Like there's a chance for you to win the ball and put your leg in, he'll just pull out even when he's got a chance to sort of like get the ball. And that sort of pisses me off as a scouting enthusiast when I look at it saying, don't do that. At the top level, that's absolutely unacceptable. And he does that like very, very often. I don't know if it's like an injury that happened when he was younger or something, but not good. From ground duels or volume of defensive actions perspective, easily one of the poorest in the league. And I said this to like a friend also, like it's hard to top somebody like a Joao Felix in that matter, but he might be actually like on par or worse in terms of just engaging defensively. So that's going to be a big, big issue for me. And if you look at his numbers, again, like 2.3, 2.2 ground duels a game, and he wins like 38, 36% of it. Aerial duels don't even ask. It's 0.1 per 90. So he wins one aerial duel every 10 games, which I don't even know how to quantify. So again, in those respects, not really somebody who you can rely on from a defensive perspective. When I was looking at tracking, like how good he is in terms of staying with his fullback, again, inconsistent. Some games I was very, very impressed, like the one game against Liverpool in the first half. He was supposed to be on Robertson, and he made like 35, 40 yard sprints backwards to keep in touch with like prime Andy Robertson, which is again a big feat to do. And he did it diligently for like I would say most of the game. So he does have it in him, but yeah, again, inconsistent, not the best at it. He will be asked to do this under Maresca. So this is again one thing which will be interesting to see. He has it in him, but how well does that translate when he comes here is again a big, big question. And yeah, that's I think like the two major concerns for me then.
Yeah, and I think there was the question around, I think, discipline too. I mean, there's been some falling outs that have been reported across multiple clubs, and again, I think the United one, it feels the weirdest to me to discuss under this context. Again, kind of with the framing of the mental health consideration in there as well. But I mean, there was obviously some challenges at Dortmund. There were some issues at City, and so there it's just a thing that we have to kind of flag. It's not saying that we're not excited for Jaden Sancho. It's not saying that we're not don't think he's going to be able to kind of contribute within this system, but also just trying to really highlight and profile the 360 of this player, and just things that should be on people's radar.
Yeah, for certain. I mean, I wouldn't want to leave out these aspects because people, like you mentioned, deserve to know that this thing has happened in the past. So again, he's like you mentioned, fallen out with almost not almost every single place that he's been at in terms of his coaching hierarchy. So Manchester City were reportedly angered by him regularly missing training sessions around the time when he rejected a contract offer from them. Um, and at Dortmund, there have also been multiple reports of like missing team training and team briefings and oversleeping multiple times. We've discussed the spat that he had with Ten Hag, who said that publicly said he wasn't good enough in training, and it is a worrying pattern. And Jadon Sancho, for one, says that his idol is Ronaldinho, and there are again like lots of parallels there in terms of like there's undeniable world class talent, but maybe like hindered by a laid back, casual approach to life. Again, Eden Hazard was the same. Never turns up in the gym, eats burgers, and ends up in preseason like 6 kilos overweight. But you've got to be a special kind of lucky to make it out in the Premier League too. And again, it cost him his career towards the end of his. Unfortunately, his ankle couldn't take it. So you can't afford to be that lackadaisical. And again, he himself has said that his early upbringing in a tough neighborhood has imbibed a couple of bad habits. He used to regularly get detention, used to regularly get into trouble. So there's definitely a childhood angle there, like in terms of how he was brought up in a difficult area. But again, at this point in time, in the prime of what should be the prime of his career, he shouldn't be letting those factors, or give anybody any issues to talk about. And hopefully, if he can put that to one side and this be the club where he's third time lucky and he's able to focus on just the football, then there's absolutely, no doubt in my mind that we'll have an incredible player. So those are the balanced strengths and weaknesses. So it could go either way, which is what I think people are afraid of. And a lot of the times, people are afraid of touching poison chalices. Like once you failed in the Premier League, then you failed. And again, there's always the famous story of everybody overlooking Mohamed Salah, and Liverpool's recruitment team said, no, this guy is popping out. You have to take a chance. And look where they are now. So hopefully one for us.
Yeah, considering it is a loan with an obligation, we are very hopeful that it pans out to be a very strong first season from him that just sets the stage for a long stay at Stamford Bridge with unparalleled success on the pitch. But look, we are going to take our last ad break when we get back. We're going to talk about the fit at Chelsea, how this situation kind of starts to parse down when we think about the number of wingers and attackers Chelsea have. How does he fit? Where Maresca might deploy him? Players that he might contribute or collaborate with well on the pitch. But we're going to do that after this ad break. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, Sam. So I know that we're still trying to figure out what's going on with Chelsea under Enzo Maresca. He's still trying to figure out maybe who some of the players are that he can fully trust, fully endorse on the pitch. And boy, oh boy, we haven't had the most consistent run of results for him to be able to do so. But I guess where are you thinking, or how easy do you think it is to just say, oh, I know drag and drop where Jaden Sancho fits in this attack? Or is it just actually another question for Enzo Maresca to solve and what feels like an endless list at the moment of challenges for him around really establishing a consistent hierarchy within the attack, and then also, like flanks, who contributes well with others, who pairs up very well? Because it feels like there are a couple like locks, right, in Nico Jackson and Cole Palmer, but it really feels like beyond that, if anyone falls out of form, there's a lot of opportunity to move up and down the attacking rungs in this current lineup.
Yeah, I honestly couldn't tell you, Dan, to be honest. I've looked at now a 3, 4 game sample size, and he's made changes in every single one. And we've gone from, looking at Leicester and saying, okay, he likes 1v1 wingers, to then seeing Nkunku out wide. Then we've seen, all kinds of changes. Enzo, again, we thought was going to play the wings role. He's ended up playing as the 8-10 that Pochettino played him in. Again, we thought we had figured it out, and against Palace, he dropped Cole Palmer to the double pivot, and we were like, what the hell? Like, again, why are you doing this to us? So I generally don't know whether he's settled upon what works best. I think maybe this is extended preseason for him, where he's still trying out certain sort of permutations, combinations, and figuring out where to, plug and play everybody else for the optimal fit. But yeah, I don't know if he understands or if he himself knows what kind of wingers he wants. And getting Joao Felix, for example, um, was again like it threw a spanner in the works. I'm saying, where does he fit? He's not an eight. He's not a 1v1 winger. So why buy him in the first place? And I would say Jadon Sancho, for me, falls in the same category. He's not a 1v1 winger. He's not an eight. He's not nowhere close to being industrious enough to be an eight. You can make, maybe an argument that you could push him at a number 10, but that comes at a major cost away from the ball. But yeah, again, like I'm looking at every single thing, every single factor, and it throws me into a lot of confusion because again, if I had to draw parallels to Leicester, he's not like Mabadiki or Fatawu or even Madueke who've benefited from the entire philosophy of yes, we're going to play into pressure centrally and then spaces are going to open up wide. Sancho is not going to take 1v1 on his fullback. So how does he benefit the system anyway? So that's going to be an interesting one. Like I mentioned, his best fit is for me a wide playmaker on the left hand side and the unfortunate or the fortunate part for all of us is that his movement and positioning patterns coincide a lot with how Nkunku and Felix like to move. So on the left hand side, they'll arguably get the ball and try to drive diagonally inside instead of going down the line and trying to cross. They're always trying to look into that inside movement. And again, it's maybe like on the right hand side there's a better fit because I feel there you put Sancho and there's a chance that you have a front four where you've got Jackson, you've got maybe Palmer in the middle, and on the left hand side you've got one of Nkunku and you've got one of maybe Joao Felix. And if you're using, Jaden Sancho to deploy cutbacks to any of those three players arriving in the box, then there's a good chance that he creates a lot for you. But the problem being that you also bought Pedro Neto. So he's also waiting in the wings. Madueke is, for me, also making a strong case for being, one of the first names of the team sheet. He's offering you the kind of 1v1 threat that nobody else in the team is offering. He's easily our easiest route into any Premier League box as of this moment. So what's the plan? Or at 25 million, was this a depth opportunity to try and figure out if you can use him in maybe the Conference League and see if he can play his way into first team plans? Honestly, wouldn't be able to let you know, but that's my read of the situation. He isn't an effortless fit, and I don't have a reference to give you in terms of like this is Maresca's tactics. They're still evolving, they're still
Sure.
changing. So maybe 4 or 5 games down the line, we'll have a more accurate read of it. I know how to use Jaden Sancho the best, but not in this system.
I think also maybe we should set the expectation that like he's not going to go from joining this team to playing or starting. I'm just going to take a guess, starting and playing 90 minutes of football the first match back after, unless there were catastrophic injuries, which fingers crossed and knock on wood it doesn't happen within the next game that Chelsea play against Bournemouth. I would imagine, someone like Barrow, which is that first League Cup game that we have in the return and in that midweek, that might be an opportunity to get Jaden Sancho his first 30 to 45 minutes potentially. It feels as if we might see what we saw with Pedro Neto in terms of like just the integration to the side. And so I would imagine if we're seeing the best of Jaden Sancho, it's probably not until the sometime in October, just in terms of like ramp. Like, would that be the right expectation to have?
Yeah, definitely. I think he did play a lot of preseason, so I was hoping that he would be in full fitness. But again, he didn't make the squad for the first couple of games. So there has been, I would say, a little bit of a setback in terms of being in a perfect condition. But easing him into those games would 100% be the priority for me. And I do think that he offers a unique option, Dan. He's, in my opinion, like the best passer out of any of the wide forward actions options we have. He's definitely somebody who's got the best creative slash playmaking value, the guy who's got the most diverse set of lock picks in his armory in terms of picking the door. So even in Maresca, I think mentioned it post Palace that against low blocks, stubborn low blocks like these, then Sancho is somebody who can come up with those solutions, and maybe that's an indication of how he will be used. Maybe in the latter stages of games when you just want to attack the box and need somebody to pick the right kind of pass, then maybe he's the guy to go in there. And yeah, that's going to be interesting. But again, like, where do you play him? Uh, for me, like on the left hand side, he makes a lot of sense. He makes in terms of like the build of the side, you look at Felix and Kunku and all of these other associated players, and against any opposition that tries to tackle you or sort of like win the ball back, you'll get the better of them like 2 out of 3 times. But again, out of possession, the left side is our problem. It's very, very weak away from the ball, out of possession. Um, and it's also super short. It's like, completely ineffectual in the air in terms of Kukureya, in terms of Lavia or Enzo or any of the other guys. So again, not the ideal build in terms of the overall picture. So at the end of the pod, Dan, I would say that in isolation, I quite like the deal. I would say it's a good pickup. If I were to make maybe a Moneyball like signing, then this would be it. If you're getting him at, like we mentioned, one-fourth of the price at like reduced wages, a guy who's still 24 has plenty of resale value. Really good deal. But when I look at the bigger picture with like 8 wingers and nobody knows where who's going to play or what the idea is in terms of like playing style, then it becomes murky for me. So that's where I'm at. And like we mentioned at the beginning of the pod, like this is where, you know, maybe the biggest point comes in terms of floor raising and ceiling
Yeah.
raising. Like, is he a floor raiser? Is he a ceiling raiser? What kind of a player is he? And if you ask me, then I think he's definitely a floor raiser. And I know I'm very insecure, so I asked two smarter people than I am, like two smart Canadians who I know who are like supremely good football writers. So Mohammed or Mo Squared on Twitter, as well as Keir Doyle, both really, really sharp, like footballing minds. And he said, look, where Sancho is different is the fact that in a team full of ceiling raisers. So just to clarify in terms of what those terms mean in basketball terms, a ceiling raiser is somebody who essentially is, maybe a high scorer, somebody who's got great individual output. So in a very, very good team, he's basically going to push it even further. He's going to give you Ronaldo, Messi like numbers. Somebody's going to skyrocket by himself. A good floor raiser is somebody who basically improves everybody around him, even when he's not having a great game. Like he will do the bare essentials to make sure the guys who are playing around him have good games. And when Jadon Sancho has a good game, the guys around him 100% have a good game. And that we saw at Dortmund with Erling Haaland, with Reina, and all of the other guys who were playing with him. Guerrero, for example, or the fullback that played with him. He's the guy who will selflessly try to find passes for you. He will create. We know he hit like 30 or almost 30 golden assist contributions in the Bundesliga. So in his prime, he's able to offer that. And we've got a lot of ceiling raisers, like potential ceiling raisers in our squad. We don't have, like, if you look at Joao Felix, you look at Mikhailo Mudryk, you look at Madueke, none of these guys are going to offer you 15 assists. None of them. Like they're very direct attackers who will try to get 15 goals because that's what matters to them. And if you want a creative flux, then there are only two players in there. There's Nkunku and there's Jadon Sancho. And I dare say Sancho's got like a more diverse skill set in terms of maybe like lifting the attack and making it a lot more cohesive and making it a lot more sort of productive in terms of numbers. So that's where I think you've got a bonus in Jadon Sancho if he comes good, being the big if.
So if he has a good season at Chelsea, he did what? And if he had a great season at Chelsea, he did blank. What would be your definition? I guess those are probably like the trying to set a standard for what the floor raising versus ceiling raising would be.
Yeah, considering how many games we have this season, 10 goals, 10 assists would be a good season for me. I would say 20 goal contributions would be a good one. I think if you count like maybe a hat trick against Barrow, or maybe like maybe like 3 goals against Astana, or hopefully like one against any opposition in Armenia, like Noah's Ark. Then yeah, I would say like 10 is a gettable number. But yeah, a great season would be making like completely tangible contributions in the big games. He's done well. When I looked at his performances against like his lone performances at Dortmund, one of his brightest games came against PSG. And he was super confident in that game. Like he gave one of the best like left backs in the world, Nuno Mendes, like a massive headache. Like a lot of the times he made pretzels out of him, turned him inside out, like balloon animals all over the place, and he looked like his earlier Dortmund reincarnation. So that was great to see. So if in those big games, in those high pressure games, which reportedly he enjoys, he's able to give you like maybe 1 goal against Liverpool or Arsenal or Manchester City, then game on. I think those big games, if he can make a big impact, especially in the latter stages of the Conference League, then I would say that's the quality there is better than the quantity. I think that's what I want him to do. Like, can he compete at that elite level and give himself as a headache to the manager, saying, "I'm an option if you want to throw me on against the big guys," and that would be a great, great season for me.
Well, that is about as thorough of a deep dive as we can do to set the stage for Jaden Sancho's start at Chelsea, his eventual debut at Stamford Bridge, hopefully coming in the very near future after the international break. But that's going to do for this episode. Thank you to Sam for the wonderful deep dive. Let us know in the comments on YouTube. Do you think he is a floor raiser, Jaden Sancho, or is he raising the ceiling in Chelsea's attack? But that's going to do for this episode. So until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.